Hello everybody, Matt and Paul here, and we have another video for you. Today we are talking about the UK-EU treaty ratification. This is the update based on the Gibraltar-Spain border effectively and the surrounding of that. So this effectively, for those who don't know, this is to resolve Gibraltar's post-Brexit position, which is finally being reset. It's not EU membership. But they released the treaty last week. We've been waiting for some time, and the treaty document, it was over 1,000 pages. Of course, we're not going to cover all that today, but what we want to do is kind of sum that up. And I think, Paul, you're best placed to do that. So the treaty, can you tell us really what this is, what it means, and what does the future look like for Gibraltar?
Thank you, Matt. I'll try to give a balanced view. But I would say it's the long-awaited treaty. It's taken 10 years following Brexit for it to come to fruition, and it's about to be implemented on the 10th of April. We must say that Gibraltar was negotiating from a position of weakness, pretty much like Spain did when it wanted to join the European Union and in 1986, and they had to effectively open the land border between Spain and Gibraltar in order for the UK to unblock its veto for joining the European Union. And the way I see it, Matt, it's like having a pebble in the shoe. It's uncomfortable, yet it's bearable. And of course, we don't know, or we don't have the expertise to interpret legal text. I mean, we'd have to wait until its practical implementation. But yes, because it's complex, it's a lengthy treaty, and there might be unexpected issues when it's implemented from a practical perspective, and then we'll know for sure whether the full effect of the treaty has been explained and communicated to the people of Gibraltar in a transparent manner. I would think so, but that remains to be seen. As I said, on the face of it, it looks like they have negotiated a very good treaty under very difficult circumstances. So what are the issues that perhaps Gibraltar is not fully content with? I've identified, Matt, about 5 things, and I'll touch upon them very, very quickly. One of them is that the residency applications are vetted through the Schengen database. So because Gibraltar effectively is not part of Schengen, but is linked to Schengen, then of course what they don't want is to give residency to an individual that can move freely through Schengen and is a risk to other Schengen member states. So whilst Gibraltar retains the right to approve residency applications, it has to go through effectively an EU Schengen security database check to make sure that there's no due diligence issues in terms of the applicant. So we retain the right to approve residency applications subject to screening. But as you know, Matt, we also have to do our own separate screening now before presenting to Gibraltar government a residency application for an individual. So it just adds another layer, but Gibraltar remains in full control. I think the EU, Spain wanted to effectively, the starting part of the point of the negotiation was that they wanted to have full control over who established their tax residency in Gibraltar, and that would have been a red line because it would have breached sovereignty and our right to determine who lives and works in Gibraltar. So that is, I would say, slightly uncomfortable. Another issue that has been flagged recently by former chief ministers and others and the opposition is that there's no, at least at this point, there's no concordat. In other words, an exit safeguard in the treaty that protects Gibraltar, because if there's a change of government in the UK, and they decide to withdraw from the treaty unilaterally, that would have serious implications for Gibraltar. Yet we have um, no clause within the treaty to protect Gibraltar's position. So Gibraltar needs to have a formal and role in the treaty where any withdrawal decision has to be requires Gibraltar's consent. So that is probably a big red flag. Then there's the joint use and management of the airport. As you know, Matt, the airport sits directly on the disputed isthmus between Gibraltar and Spain, not covered by the Treaty of Utrecht signed in 1713. Spain claims that it is not covered by the treaty. Gibraltar claims that over time it becomes part of the territory of Gibraltar. Um, and the treaty has included arrangements where there's shared civilian use of the airport. There's a terminal on the Spanish side. There's coordinated aviation operations. And that could be sensitive to some Gibraltar residents, because some can view it as conceding on shared sovereignty, and Spain gaining an institutional foothold on the airport. Um, but I would disagree, because the Cordoba Agreement, which was signed in 2006, had all these provisions in it. So all we're doing is we are implementing something that was agreed in an agreement with Spain, with Gibraltar agreed to, and had put in place all the facilities to incorporate the shared civilian use, a terminal on the Spanish side, but Spain didn't keep to the agreement. So I don't see why anyone should be anxious or should be uncomfortable with shared use of the airport. I think, Matt, it opens up the Gibraltar airport to EU flight destinations, and I think that could be commercially advantageous for all parties. So, yeah, to set up a joint venture company for the running of the management of the operation, but not the ownership, is I think one of the things that was agreed many moons ago, 20 years ago to be precise. Then the fourth one is the regulatory alignment with the EU for customs and VAT. That is a condition for Schengen, and whereas that can cause some issues for local business retailers in terms of having to implement effectively an input duty which is not lower than the lowest in the EU, and so there's some pricing issues. Again, I think we've come out of this really lightly, because VAT is not being applied to services, which would have been extremely detrimental to our financial services sector and other sectors as well. So it's just an input duty. Will replace an old input duty. Arguably, it's a higher level of duty, but still, I would say something which is entirely tolerable. Um, but of course, the concern could be whether the EU then subsequently, encouraged by Spain, start pushing for tax harmonization across the board, which of course would reduce Gibraltar's competitive tax advantage. Now, that is highly unlikely to happen, because I don't think any Gibraltar government would agree to a treaty that can then develop into something which covers full tax harmonization. I don't think that's a something that will materialize, but perhaps something to keep an eye on. And then for me personally, the one thing I haven't seen in the treaty, and I have to say that I've looked at a condensed version of the treaty, is that the Gibraltar government recently made some noises um, that Spain had failed to keep to their agreement and commitment You remember, Matt, that they signed a double taxation treaty with Gibraltar.
Yeah.
I think it was in 2019, effective 2021. And one of the conditions was, upon signing the agreement, within 2 years, Gibraltar would be whitelisted by Spain. Spain has a track record of not keeping to agreements when it comes to Gibraltar. And they haven't whitelisted Gibraltar. And more recently, they've been arguing that once the treaty is in place, they would whitelist Gibraltar. The Gibraltar government quite recently said that they wouldn't sign a treaty unless Gibraltar was whitelisted. Well, I mean, I haven't seen anything to that effect. In other words, I haven't seen um, any provision within the treaty that talks about Spain whitelisting Gibraltar. And I don't think the government or the opposition have raised the issue. So I'd be interested to see whether, um, and this is not for one to be tax residents, but more generally, I think it would be very advantageous for Gibraltar as a finance center if Spain were to whitelist the jurisdiction. So not one mention of that so far. So yeah, there's 5 things, but as you can see, Matt, none of them are issues that should concern us greatly. Now, in terms of the benefits, I think there's about a couple of things I would say. Yeah, the last land border, the last wall, yeah, after the Berlin Wall, this was one of the few remaining physical land borders across Europe, and yeah, Article 28 of the treaty states that all physical barriers related to circulation of persons between Gibraltar and Spain stroke EU are to be removed. So free movement of people, it would be a Schengen border essentially. There's it eliminates completely the prospect of a hard border with Spain and the issues that that could create in a post-Brexit world. In terms of cross-border movement, it would be a stranglehold on the Gibraltar economy. So it avoids that. It avoids a hard border. I think that had to be number one priority for any negotiating party. That we needed to have fluidity at the border. The irony, Matt, is that Gibraltar, as an associated member of the European Union through the UK, during EU membership had a at times hard border with Spain because they used it as a stranglehold on the economy. And now that we're outside the EU, the land, the physical border is going to disappear and we're going to have full fluidity. So that's a difficult one to digest. I think is really positive. So that's one. The second benefit is Schengen access for Gibraltar tax residents, which is great news for anyone wanting to come to Gibraltar. So Article 41 of the treaty says that Gibraltar residents may enter and remain within the Schengen area for 90 days in any 180-day period without a visa. Clearly, this is not, EU free movement. It cannot be because we're not part of the European Union, but it restores the mobility which has been lost by UK nationals after Brexit, because a UK national living in the British Isles, flying out to Greece, when they land in the airport in Athens, let's give Athens as an example, they have to queue and they have to go through the documentation, and it's normally quite a long drawn process. So what it does is, for Gibraltar tax residents, you can move through freely through the Schengen area countries with your passport or ID or whatever is required to get through, and there's no you queue under the EU queue rather than the UK queue. So something that UK nationals in the UK and UK nationals tax resident in other expat destinations don't have. So a very big plus. Then under Article 42 of the treaty, Gibraltar residents become exempt from the EU's biometric entry-exit system, which is due to be implemented, if I'm correct, Matt, is it 10th of April? Is that correct?
I think so. I think that's why they needed to sort the treaty by then. But
Exactly.
in fairness, this biometrics thing has been delayed multiple times already. So, we will see if it does actually come into force then. But that's the plan, I believe. Yeah.
That's right. I think it was due to be implemented in November of last year, but a lot of countries didn't have the infrastructure in place to apply the biometrics. But look, processing will be less intrusive and it'll be administratively lighter than for third country travel. So frictionless movement within Schengen, only for Gibraltar tax residents, and that must be a very strong, compelling case for anyone considering establishing their tax residency in Gibraltar. Then Article 42.2 talks about Gibraltar residents being exempt from the European travel information and authorization system. I think it's called ETIAS. So it removes the need for digital pre-travel authorization and all the fees that come with it. That would have caused massive distraction, uh, massive problems at the land border with Spain, friction, costs, time. So that is avoided as well. And then alongside that, there's no passport stamping, Matt. So Article 42.1 refers to the entry and exit stamps, which will not be affixed to any Gibraltar resident with travel documents. So um, the issue with that was that you get stamped, pre-treaty if a Gibraltar tax resident moved beyond the immediate hinterland. So you wanted to go to Malaga Airport to catch a flight, you should really get a stamp when you exit Gibraltar. Those were the old rules. But now we avoid passport stamping. So I would think that that is a massive plus. And then I don't think there's too many, but I would mention two more pluses that we are entering into a bespoke EU Gibraltar Customs Union arrangement. It is not a We're not a part of the customs union by way of membership. It's a tailored arrangement which is limited to goods. But look, it creates um, an ability for the free movement of goods, which is critical for a territory like Gibraltar, which is connected by land to mainland Europe. And I think, lastly, Matt, is that finally, we have the legal and political certainty after Brexit, because Gibraltar was left in limbo, whereas Northern Ireland moved more quickly and I think concluded an agreement. I might be wrong. In 2023, Gibraltar has been left in limbo for far too long. So this treaty embeds, structured governance, cooperation mechanisms, dispute resolution architecture between the parties involved. So after so many years of uncertainty, Gibraltar's external relationship with the EU is now institutionalized and covered by a treaty which has more legal effect than just a normal agreement. It reduces geopolitical risk premiums. It strengthens confidence in the property market locally, and it provides a very clear operating framework for professional advisors, but equally for high net worth individuals who are considering different expat destinations and weighing marginal tax differentials, and then realize that Gibraltar provides, the has the tax edge, but now has a special arrangement with the European Union, with Schengen, involving free movement. I think it's a game changer. It makes Gibraltar such an interesting jurisdiction, both for lifestyle, for tax, and for, I would say, free movement.
Yeah, No, I would agree with that, Paul, and it's a brilliant summary, by the way. Thank you for that. And
My pleasure.
if I look at it from a non-Gibraltarian, um, I think, Gibraltarians, they will look at the pros and cons. There's a lot of history by there, and there's a balanced view. If I'm looking at it from a UK expat looking to move to Gibraltar, I would probably see only pros, really. I think, as you say, it's a game changer. And when we talk to people about relocation, I mean, both you and I have had people who said before, no, until the treaty is ratified, I don't want to relocate. But also, we talk about moving here, there's the tax advantages, the lifestyle. And I think maybe the one barrier is some people say Gibraltar is small. Gibraltar is a small jurisdiction. And we've always said, and you've said a lot in our videos, that you can view Gibraltar as like a town in the UK. You don't spend your whole life in that town. You go to other towns. You go to London, Manchester, Edinburgh, wherever it may be. And Gibraltar is the same. You can travel into Spain, Portugal, in the EU. But of course, before that, we would say that, but there is the border there. So there's uncertainty. You have to cross the border. Now it is effectively just going to the next town over, isn't it? That's all it is. Jump in your car. There's no border checks. You're in Spain. That's it. And going from Gibraltar to Spain will just be like when you go from Spain to Portugal. You don't really know you're going across it until you recognize, oh yeah, there's a sign, welcome to Portugal. And I think for UK expats who are looking for their dream kind of relocation area, I think it's going to be hard to beat now.
No, it's going to be hard to beat. It's going to be, I think, a major game changer. It's like I remember driving through Côte d'Azur to a meeting in Monaco, and normally there's a very light border control which is operated, but I remember going into Monaco, there was nothing. It was like, really? And I mean, now there's going to be that freedom of movement into Gibraltar, which is going to be incredible for anyone considering Gibraltar as an expert destination and having that worry about, okay, but the border is troublesome at time. Well, with this treaty, it won't be troublesome because there's no border. The checkpoints are the airport and the port, but not the border. So it's going to be fantastic. And then the other thing, Matt, worth mentioning, um, is that we have the political uncertainty and unrest in the Middle East, and Dubai got is under has been the recipient of ballistic missiles and drones. So it's not as secure. So a lot of British nationals will be looking at the other destinations. And yes, if you look across um, the Med for similar tax-friendly jurisdictions, you've got Cyprus, but it's quite close to Iran. You've got Malta in the middle of nowhere in the Med, and yeah, it's bigger than Gibraltar clearly, but it's very small, and you have to catch a flight. And then you've got Gibraltar, which has all the tax benefits, but yet it's connected to mainland Europe through Spain with all the tax benefits. And there's really, I think, people considering Dubai may well want to consider another Mediterranean country, and Gibraltar it comes up trump when it comes to ticking the boxes, yeah,
Yeah.
because no other place can provide what Gibraltar provides today, with a caveat that we're still waiting for the residency pathways, the new eligibility criteria, and the tax associated with that. So we don't know, but I believe the Gibraltar government cabinet is meeting this week and finalizing the details. So I think it's a matter of days before they release the new eligibility criteria and the tax consequences. But so long as it remains a benign tax environment, I mean, Gibraltar it could be one of the big winners of so much political unrest globally, and particularly now in very stable Middle East countries like Qatar, Saudi, and more importantly, Dubai, which is a favorite expert destination for Brits.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that I will add this is when we're talking about the attractiveness of Gibraltar to relocate, We're talking about people who live here, become tax resident, but actually live here. We both get it very often, Paul, and I've had it even more with the border opening up. People say, "Oh, I can establish my tax residency in Gibraltar," and how do they know, if I'm living in Spain or Portugal because there are no border checks? And that is not the way to go because they will catch people out who are planning to do that. And, so many people are asking that question. I'm sure Hacienda, the tax authorities, they're probably aware of this situation and they're probably thinking, like they did catch a lot of people out post-Brexit, Brits who were in the Spain under the radar, they will aim to catch people who try and do that as well.
Well, the double taxation agreement, which predates this treaty, already covers, the extent of the cooperation, which is beyond the common reporting standards on a global basis. So effectively, if unless it's a fishing expedition, the Spanish tax authorities can get information from the Gibraltar tax authorities in the case of, going through a process, clearly not just fishing around for additional information. But no, Spain, the fact that you can travel freely doesn't give you carte blanche to abuse the system in Spain. And Hacienda, the tax authorities in Spain, are very aggressive when it comes to tax fraud.
Yeah,
And they look at electricity bills, they look at um, their spending patterns and so on. And I don't think you'll get away with it. Nor would we process an application if the individual is really tax resident in Spain, because
absolutely.
there's our professional reputation to protect, and that's not the idea. Quite another thing is that you have a property in Spain and you make use of that during limited periods, staying within the letter and spirit of the law, which is no more than 90 every 180 days. There's ways of doing it properly. You can enjoy Spain, don't abuse the rules, and what we want is people who are really legitimately tax resident locally, rather than
Abs-
looking for yeah, to con the tax authorities in Spain. That's not our business.
Exactly. Perfect. Well, thank you, Paul. And for those watching, you may be keen on Gibraltar residency. You may actually, a very interesting video that you can watch now is our Category 2 residency in Gibraltar because we are able to offer a route to residency via the Category 2 route only at the moment. So normal residency is still on pause, but Category 2 applications can be assessed and we as a company have a route to that. So feel free to watch that video and reach out to us if you are interested in obtaining Gibraltar residency. But for now, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.